But a week ago, Keir Starmer was in the final throes of a general election campaign. Today, he was in Washington as Prime Minister, meeting fellow global leaders, including the US President at the NATO summit. It was his first taste of the world stage, but also his first taste of the pressures of office, with repeated questions about his new government's commitment on defence spending. Well, joining us now is the former Armed Forces Minister, James Heappey. Good to have you on the programme tonight. Keir Starmer at the NATO summit, what are your reflections? There's been a lot of focus on whether or not Labour are committing enough on defence.
Yeah, well, look, first of all, it's great to see our Prime Minister being so well met by world leaders. It's a kind of reminder that party politics is a rather temporary thing and the UK is an important player in global defence and security, and I'm very proud to see that he's as welcome and fits in as well as a Conservative Prime Minister would have done. I am, however, disappointed that the announcement for 2.5% of GDP on defence hasn't been made here. I kind of thought it might be. There's no duplicity. In fairness to Labour, ever since we made the announcement back in March, they've stuck with what was the original Conservative position of when fiscal conditions allow. But I thought there was an opportunity to really kind of stamp the UK mark on the summit, send a message to allies, to Ukraine, and actually to Donald Trump and the Republicans who meet for their convention next week, that European defence spending was going to rise and the UK was going to lead on it.
How important is that to, I guess, kind of Donald Trump-proof NATO? Because, you know, we all know the arguments that he makes that, look, why should America stump up so much for defence spending if European countries in particular, or NATO countries, aren't pulling their weight?
Well, so I think that is one of his key lines. You know, he has said in the past that he thinks that there are too many in Europe that get a free ride. Now, in fairness, that was never criticism that was aimed at the UK. But I think it is incumbent on the UK as one of the key allies within NATO to really kind of lead from the front and say, follow me, we're doing 2.5%. There's another point, Sophie, which is less geopolitical. It's just the reality of the state that our armed forces are in. I came onto your show back in March when the announcement was made. And you rightly said, you know, this is, A, the money is coming pretty slowly, and B, it's not going to grow the armed forces. And all of that was true. It's still true now. But what 2.5% does is gets our current armed forces in their current size back to the kind of match fitness that they need for war fighting, rather than the more discretionary counterinsurgency missions they've been doing in Iraq, Afghanistan and elsewhere over the last 2 decades. If that money doesn't come urgently now, then the forces that we've got at their current size won't be capable of full-scale war fighting. So there's a choice at that point. You either accept that they remain hollowed out for longer, or you have to reduce the size of the armed forces and make the forces that you've got then credible. Neither of those be palatable. So if I was in the Prime Minister's shoes, I would, yes, do the review. It's necessary to consider defence, foreign security policy every 5 years. And as an incoming government, of course, they would want to do that. But if you know that your landing point is a commitment to 2.5%, that's what the Prime Minister has said on the plane to Washington, make that commitment now, say that's happening, and then do the review to work out how you would spend the money, rather than the review to get to where you've already said you're going.
Can I ask you about the very first part of your answer? Because I was quite intrigued when you were saying, look, it's great to see, you know, a UK Prime Minister welcomed on the world stage, even if he's a Labour Prime Minister. In the election campaign, Rishi Sunak said Keir Starmer won't keep our country safe because he won't invest in our security. You know, was that really a responsible thing to say?
Well, I think in election campaigns, all sorts of things are said.
Or even irresponsible ones?
Yeah, because I think people are campaigning and they're trying to draw a distinction between the different politics and different approaches.
Keir Starmer won't keep our country safe.
But there is a thing, well, and in fairness, there are plenty of choice things that Keir and Labour politicians have said about the Prime Minister. What matters is that when you come through the other side of an election, the thing I hate more than anything, and I wonder if your other guests would agree, is when people pop up on social media and say silly things like, this government, not in my name. Well, what a nonsense. You know, we've had a democratic exercise last week in which a government has been returned. resoundingly. I now want to see our Prime Minister succeed on our nation's behalf on the world stage. Of course, I have concerns that some of his shadow cabinet, some of his cabinet, very recently voted against Trident's renewal. But I now want them to succeed and keep our country safe and do well for us all.
Let's talk a bit about the election because, look, you got an absolute hammering.
Yeah.
Your old seat, I know that there have been boundary changes, but it got totally swept away with the Lib Dem kind of yellow wave, if you like. Building the party going forward, what do you think needs to happen?
Well, not quite so much of the open warfare that's going on Twitter between two of the leading protagonists in the leadership campaign today.
If you're wondering what that is, just fill you in. Henry Badenoch's comments at Cabinet were leaked.
Shadow Cabinet. No,
Shadow
you're doing
Cabinet,
it.
I'm doing it as well now. And she criticised Suella Braverman, and then Suella Braverman then tweeted to say, I'd be interested in knowing whether Kemi thinks I'm having a very public nervous breakdown. Is your party having a public nervous breakdown?
Well, I think your viewers could be forgiven for saying so. And therein is the problem, right? What happened last week is miserable. Hundreds of colleagues have lost their jobs. Stand fast that plenty out there would say, my party had it coming. Collectively, we did. But there were lots of individual stories of people losing their job or their staff losing their job. It's a horrible time. Emotions are high. But we won't be electable again as a party until we recover the discipline and the ambition to be in government again. Took Labour all the way through the Miliband years and through the Corbyn years. It took us all the way through the parliaments of 97 to 2001 and 2001 to 2005 to finally move to where the public were and then recover the ambition and the discipline that the public need to see to go into government. It's hard to criticise people who are still in shock, still highly emotional. But just to be clear, no one is going to start thinking better of the Conservative Party if we play out the leadership election in quite the way it's being played out on Twitter today.
Is there any names in particular that you'd like to hear a pitch from?
So, look, my natural inclination is to head towards people like Tom Tugendhat and Victoria Atkins. I think, however, that people like James Cleverly and Rob Jenrick might actually emerge as the kind of bridge candidates who can bring people together. I just Reform are where they are. Reform may stake out a piece of political turf that is irreversibly theirs. The Lib Dems have theirs. There is an absolute gulf between the right-hand end of the Lib Dems and the left-hand end of Reform, and that is exactly where the Conservative Party needs to be. It's also pretty much exactly where the British public are and where lots of Western publics are, just to the right of centre. If we go off and have an ideological wrestle with Farage, it would be an enormous mistake and would keep us out of power for 10, 15 years.
OK, thank you very much. Good to talk to you and have your analysis today. Thank you very much. James Heappey there.